I first got my PlayStation in 1997 when I was about 3 years old, and I've basically been a PlayStation kid ever since. The PlayStation was bought for me and my older sisters, but since they were quite a bit older than me and they were in college, I spent most of the time playing it, and as they moved out, it eventually just sort of became mine. I still have the old girl, and she's almost as old as me, and still functions perfectly, so she's perhaps in better kit than I am. As I grew up, my stepbrother and I would always play games together. We both got our PS2s on the same Christmas, and a lot of my tastes come from him. I mostly preferred the weird JRPG stuff, your Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasies, whereas he played a lot of action games, mainly first-person shooters. We would spend hours playing 007 Nightfire or Timesplitters 2, maybe even some Half-Life Decay when I could convince him. But while I was playing these FPS games as a kid, there was always a thought in the back of my mind. Something nibbling away at me. Something I just couldn't quite come to terms with. Yeah, but it's not Halo. Perhaps these days it's a little easier to escape Halo's shadow, especially in a post-Call of Duty 4 world, but back when I was a kid, it was just sort of accepted wisdom that Halo was the FPS game of choice. People raved about these games and how wonderful they were, not just in single player but also online multiplayer. These mythical Halo 2 nights were something us PlayStation kids could only gawk at and envy. And soon, there was a very gauche term on the pages of every magazine and the news websites. Halo Killer. The magical being that would put us all out of our misery. A first-person shooter to rival or even surpass Halo. It never really materialised, and the term fell out of use in the early 7th console generation, roughly around the time that Modern Warfare came out of nowhere and started a new trend. These things happen. Genres and franchises come and go, but back when I was a kid, Halo felt unstoppable, and several games were touted as the one and final Halo killer. The main games I remember being touted as the Halo killer with the likes of Killzone, Haze, if you can believe it, and another one that most people seem to have forgotten, but one that sticks in my memory better than the others. Warhammer 40,000 Fire Warrior. Hey, I'm Heather, and welcome to Retro Relapse. I first discovered the Warhammer universe at a friend's house when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. I went over to play, and they were painting a box of Space Marines. The striking blue colour and their awesome looking chunky armour immediately gripped me. There was something so very cool about building your own little space dudes, equipping them with guns and armour, and then making them fight the armies of other kids. Whenever we hung out, we'd make Space Marines and fight each other. Not that we knew the rules, of course, but we made up our own. Then, finally, for my birthday, I got myself a box of Space Marines. I put them all together and put some awful blue paint on them. I then immediately forgot about their existence and went back to my JRPGs. We ain't gonna find King Mickey if I'm pissing about with spacemen after all. But I kept watch on Warhammer. The universe still enthralled me. I would occasionally wander into the game's workshop in my local town and have a look at all the cool figures, the awesome scenery and all those books people apparently read. But a year or two later, I would become very suddenly interested in Warhammer again, when I saw the first previews and trailers for Fire Warrior. These days, it basically rains Warhammer licensed games. Some of them are great, and most are fairly mediocre. Fire Warrior came before Games Workshop were handing out licenses to literally anyone who wrote them a drunken email. It was the first 40k game developed for home consoles, and the first real first-person shooter to bear the license. 40k games were a rarity, and I didn't really have a PC at the time to play any of the good ones, so Fire Warrior felt like a big deal. The trailers I used to see on video game TV channels, usually nestled between weird text and TV games and borderline softcore porn,
Kill Jester,
were amazing to me. These big bulky space fellas firing really colourful lasers at each other while standing in this huge gothic environment really was breathtaking. As an 8-year-old at least. Aiding in my excitement was, of course, the coverage in game magazines. In my previous Dark Cloud video, go watch it, it's decent, I spoke about how video game magazines and demo discs that came with them really were the only real way to find out about new games. I didn't have the internet, so these 100 pages were my monthly intake of game news. The main magazine that I bought was Play magazine, and although I would later branch out into Games Master, rest in peace you beautiful bastards, and PC Gamer, I probably have more issues of Play than anything else. In this magazine, Brown nosed the shit out of Fire Warrior. They even ended up on the front of the box in the PAL release. It was their featured review the month it came out, and they give it a 91%. That's high praise, especially considering that this would make this game, by their estimation, better than Max Payne, Silent Hills 2 and 3, Metal Gear Solids 2 and 3, and perhaps most interestingly, Half-Life. Put a pin on that. And they capped off the review with, "Who needs Halo? Did Fire Warrior quench the Halo thirst in our hearts? Did it fuck? Let's talk about it." I usually save the whole version differences and how to play the game apart for the end of the video, but I really have to get this off my chest. Fire Warrior was not a PS2 exclusive. Weirdly enough, there was also a PC version released alongside it. Getting video games in 2003 to work on a modern PC can be kind of a bitch, so I was initially going to use the PlayStation 2 version for recording this footage. But then I realised it got a GOG release some time ago. Neat, I thought, naive bitch that I am. Means I can show the game at a higher resolution and futz about with the settings somewhat. So I slapped down my 4.5 smackaroonies and boot up the game and head to the options menu, only to be greeted with sound options. Oh shit. It's a console port. So in order to get Fire Warrior running on any capacity, you'll have to fire up the launcher, which is painless enough. You get plenty of options here, but you're gonna have to fiddle about with the audio settings. But more on that later. The one thing you'll absolutely 100% need to do is turn auto-aim on. I will explain momentarily. Fire Warrior makes an interesting first impression. The initial cutscene is fine. It shows a bunch of people getting murdered by Space Marines, which, yeah, sounds about right. They butcher everyone apart from this one fella with a staff, and they get the fuck out, leaving no witnesses. This is the part where I have to explain some of the basics of the Warhammer 40k lore, and I'm sorry. Warhammer 40k is a dumb as fuck grimdark universe where nobody does anything other than kill each other. Everything in Warhammer is at least 7 steps too extra. Everyone in the world is a dickhead and everything is a cathedral. This universe includes races such as the Catholic Space Nazis, the Lads on Tour, elves, sad elves, spiky boys, and the main subject of this game, communist space weebs. You play as Case, a Tau fire warrior, basically a foot soldier, part of a squad sent to save the old fella with the staff. The Tau as a race were contentious when they were first introduced into the tabletop game. A lot of people saw their anime mecha art style and the fact that they weren't all baby-eating shitheels, and kinda just shrugged them off. This game roughly coincided with the release of the Tau in the tabletop game, largely to capitalise on it, I'd imagine. So, before we head into battle, we should probably check the tutorial, you know, freshen ourselves up a bit. This training level is where the first red flags of Fire Warrior really start waving in my head. This level, and pretty much all of the game, was dead silent, at least for me. I seem to remember this tutorial having voiceover. Nothing I did would make voiceover happen. So you'll spend most of this training mission just standing around like a spare prick waiting for doors to open. Although this guy spoke for some reason. You'll quickly find something eerily familiar about the training level as well.
Welcome to the Black Mesa Hazard Course for Security Guard Training.
It's just a shit version of the Black Mesa training facility. And honestly, you could probably say that every narrative-based first-person shooter since 1998 is basically a shit version of Half-Life. And I would agree, don't get me wrong, but that's for another time. This is also where you will quickly realise why I told you to turn the auto-aim on. These are, by far, the least accurate weapons I have ever seen in a first-person shooter outside of some sim games. The weapon spread is frankly insane, and it makes hitting anything damn near impossible. Auto-aim does fix some of this, but the inaccuracy of your weapons will be a constant annoyance through Fire Warrior's entire runtime. Which is weird, seeing as we're playing as, well, Fire Warriors. The Tau's entire shtick is that they can hit the flea of a dog's arse from 3 miles away, but as soon as you get up close they're like, I'm baby. So the fact that Tau weapons, and honestly all weapons, are so painfully inaccurate just doesn't ring true to the source material. There is a lore room in the tutorial, which is pretty cool, I guess. Anyway, the game proper starts the way pretty much every post-Half-Life FPS starts. In a moving vehicle soaking in the atmosphere. In theory, anyway. You can't actually hear the guy talking to you at all. The sound issues really show their heads here. Nobody sounds loud enough, and without subtitles it's pretty much impossible to hear anyone in the early game. And do you know what this reminds me of? Yeah, it's basically the Normandy scene from Allied Assault, and when comparing the game to Allied Assault, it's fairly obvious that's where a lot of inspiration came from. And it's sad to see this game just fail so badly at recreating it. Fire Warrior has some really obvious pretensions of being a really large, bombastic and cinematic action game, in the same vein as your Medal of Honors or Call of Duty, which was released in the same month as Fire Warrior. God, this game had no chance. You can see it in how the soundscape in the early levels is pretty much just explosions, gunfire and radio chatter. Explosions go off all around you and your squad mates end up falling to, well, something I guess. So the game has good ideas and sets a high bar for itself in the sound design. It's just a shame that the sound effects and the voice clips are, for the most part, absolutely dreadful. Every sound effect feels crackly and low quality, like they're from a very early PC game or something, and the weapons sound really weak and they never really pack the kind of punch they should. And the reloading sound effect is... I don't know man, this doesn't sound right. But the worst part of the sound design is, by far, the enemy voice acting. Voice acting in general in this game is a bit hit or miss. The Tau all sound kinda weird and not right, but then you get to the late game characters who sound genuinely pretty great. If a little hammy, don't get me wrong. But then there's the enemy infantry. Enemies have 2 or 3 sound bites that they love to repeat over and over again, a bit like a Torii MP. Sometimes 2 enemies will say the exact same thing at the same time, or they'll say the same thing twice in a row. Not only that, but the voice clips themselves are really low quality.
No activity.
It's quiet. And it sure is quiet because you'll never really hear any music throughout the game at all. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing by default. Some of the best sound designs in games can be dead silence. When you're walking through the streets of Silent Hill or the dank corridors of Lordran, silence can really be the most effective kind of ambience. But in Fire Warrior, it just sounds empty, dull and drab. I mean, I even had to steal music from other 40k games just for the intro of this video. There's none. So the soundscape in this game, when there is one, is a bit of a pisser, but sound is only one half of the presentation. How does it look? Like a fucking PS2 game, that's for sure. Okay, so I will say that this game does nail the 40k aesthetic mostly. Fans of the tabletop will recognise a lot of the weapons and character designs, and they seem pretty faithful to my admittedly untrained eyes. The tower are all sleek and tech looking, guardsmen all look like they've come to battle in their pyjamas, and space marines in this game are absolutely terrifying at first. Arguably, this is one of the only 40k games to actually sell fighting a space marine as a big deal, but we'll get onto that in the spoiler section. On a technical level, the graphics are fine. I'm a bit nostalgic for early to mid 2000s graphics, so I'm wearing my bias on my sleeve with this one. Weapon models are nice, and there's also some really pretty vistas. I actually had to stop and soak these in from time to time. I don't know why this moon looks so good and like this ship looks like a fucking JPEG, but it's okay, I can forgive it. A lot of this game, especially towards the end, was giving me Painkiller vibes, which can only be a good thing. It has this gothic architectural look to it, and I eat that shit up. Sure, the faces on a lot of the models, especially the Tau and this fella, look a little funky, but it's 2003. What are you gonna do? The environments do start to become kinda samey after a while, which is a shame because it was doing a decent job at keeping them nice and varied in the early game. So the environments are pretty, but how does it feel to actually run and shoot in them? Oof. The biggest problem with Fire Warrior is that it's a game with an identity crisis. It can't decide if it wants to be Halo, Half-Life, Doom or Medal of Honor, and as a consequence, it just kinda comes across as a confused mess. For example, we run around collecting coloured keys to open doors. That's something I don't have an issue with, but in 2003, this was pretty gauche. Especially in a post-Half-Life world where you didn't pick up the red key, you just naturally made your way through the environments. But at the same time that you're picking up these very arcadey looking 90s door keys, you're only holding 2 weapons at a time, one of which has to be a Tau weapon, which is a bit of a pisser in the early game when the only Tau weapon you have is this creature that can barely hit an enemy guard when they're at a fairly reasonable range. You'll pick up better weapons like the Imperial Guard plasma rifle and machine gun, which are fine, but the auto-aim is still your enemy here. No matter how good the weapon is, the weapon spread never stops being absolutely ridiculous. The weapon variety in this game is standard. You'll pick up a variety of assault weapons alongside perhaps the world's least satisfying shotgun, and a couple of pistols and sniper rifles. The one weapon that stands out is the heavy bolter rifle. You see, other 40k games have trouble accurately portraying the bolter. This is because, like with most stuff in 40k, if you portrayed it accurately, it would be a balancing shit show. You can see this in the Dawn of War games, which, as much as I love them, the heavy bolter just kinda seems like a pea shooter, which is very much not how it's described in the lore. In the lore, the heavy bolter is basically a rifle that shoots flaming houses that explode on impact and pretty much tear everything to shreds. So I'm glad Fire Warrior got that right. There you go, that's literally the one thing this game does better than Dawn of War. So, as I mentioned before, this game follows the Halo model of regenerating health. You have a regenerating shield that will take a set amount of damage for you, and if that depletes, enemy attacks will start to chip away at your health, which can only be refilled with health packs. It's Halo, like a lot of things in this game, although it has the issue where it thinks that having regenerating health is a license to chuck enemies at you without thinking to provide adequate cover. So, like in a lot of other bad FPS games, you'll spend a lot of your time just staring at a wall waiting for the shield to go back so you can actually start playing the game again. Fire Warrior's basic gameplay just feels copied and pasted from other games without really understanding what made them work. Standard enemies in Fire Warrior tend to come in 4, and only 4, flavours. You get your basic grubs, Sergeant Biggest Dickus, Space Marines, and Chaos Fellas. There are some differences, but every enemy in the game generally fits to one of these 4 categories. So you spend most of the game running through the same areas, firing dull, impactless weapons at the same 3 or 4 enemies since the game started, and this is as boring as it sounds. And Fire Warrior really starts to drag around the halfway point. Okay, we're about to dive headlong into spoiler territory now, so if you really want to play Fire Warrior and see the story for yourself, sorry, that means I'm clearly bad at my job, but if you do, go to the timestamp above and you'll avoid any spoilers. Okay, so, as I mentioned before, you play as Case, a Fire Warrior. The Tau split their race into 4 castes that do different things, but go read the Warhammer wiki if you want that explained. I don't have 6 hours and I'm not your mom. You're part of a squad that's sent to rescue Kovash, the staff fella from the intro, and everything seems to be going fairly well. You kill a bunch of Imperial Guard, no big issue there, they're basically made of paper and glue. What I didn't know was made of paper and glue was this Imperial gunship, which I blew up with my Tau rifle. I know for a fact a lot of people found this really annoying because it's not lore accurate, and that really tickles me. At least I think I killed it anyway. It kinda just blew up, but I'm taking the credit anyway. So you rescue Kovash, and you get the first glimpse of this mad lad called Severus. He says some spooky nonsense and then leaves you to fight a Space Marine. And I'm not gonna lie, this was really cool. Space Marines are, to be honest, fucking terrifying. Almost every game set in the 40k universe features Space Marines as the protagonists, and I honestly understand why. They're iconic. When you say 40k to someone, people automatically think of these wee blue space fellas, except that is 100% not the case. Space Marines are the real shit. Space Marines are the DEFCON 1 of the Imperium. They are 8 feet tall, genetically engineered humans wearing armour thick enough that it could case in Chernobyl. Space Marines are, like everything else in 40k, 7 levels too extra. I remember seeing a video interview with the developers of this game, and I can't find it, so I'm sorry, but they said that they wanted the player to experience Space Marines by actually fighting them. They wanted to show the Space Marines from the viewpoint of someone that had to come to terms with the fact that, oh my god, I have to kill this? And that is, in my opinion, the correct approach. Did the team pull it off? Well, yes and no. When you first fight them, you'll probably go into panic because, well, look at the fucking size of them. They're big bulky boys firing exploding houses at you, and they're spooky. Then you kill them and realise that the mystique is kinda gone a bit. You'll end up fighting a lot of them, and the shine really comes off at the end. So anyway, you rescue Kovash, call yourself an Uber back to the Tau spaceship, where you get raided by the Imperial Guard again. Once again, they're made of cardboard and glue, and now they drop better weapons, so they're even easier to mow down. Around about this point, I started to sour on Fire Warrior. In the opening levels, I was willing to say it was a mediocre curiosity. Something for 40k fans to have some fun with, but not having much in the way of appealing to non-fans. This is where the game starts to take the piss slightly. While an attack on the home base might sound like something kinda fun and interesting, in reality it's the same 3 or 4 hallways reused over and over and over again. What stood out to me was this moment where you had to collect 3 different coloured keys off of 3 different guardsmen throughout the ship. What made this interesting is that it showed just how rigid Fire Warrior is as a game. Ideally this would be a cool little section to include some player choice. You could, in theory, choose which key to go after in any order, adding a little bit of variety, letting the game take its hand off the wheel for a bit, and letting you explore and do things at your own pace. Sadly, this is not what happens. You get all 3 keys in a specific order, culminating in you killing the 3rd and final sergeant by using the environment to your advantage. Wouldn't this have been really cool? Like, if there was more of this? The idea that the Tau are the more technologically superior race, and the Imperium are now on their turf, could open up some really neat gameplay ideas. Using the environment and security systems to lure them into death traps, playing a little girly, you know? But no, this is the one time anything like this happens, and it is pretty cool. There's also sniping scenes later on in the game, and I did find these really cool. Until I realised that there is a dead zone that if you walk past, you will just instantly die. This is because you have to clear out all of the opposing snipers in one area before proceeding to the next, and if you try and cross, well, you die. So while that is a sort of nice way to add variety to the gameplay, it's still very rigid. Anyway, you open the goofy tricolour door, blow these guys up, plant some charges, and get back to the base where you're informed that a truce has been called. I mean, fair enough. We've spent the last few hours pissing on the Emperor's chips, so it makes sense that they'd at least want to parlay. You're also given hints in this section that there's perhaps a more insidious, more sinister threat that needs dealt with. This is also where the voice acting gets really, really good. Ardius, that's this guy, his voice acting is some pretty top-notch smarmy cheese. And Brian Blessed must have been picking bits of the scenery out of his teeth for fucking weeks after this. Although you can count the pixels on these cutscenes. The parlay goes about as well as you can expect. You're given a brief moment of peace with the Space Marines. This is also where I realised how short Case must be. It's like he's crouching, before it turns out that, surprise surprise, Severus was the bad guy the whole time, bringing with him a bunch of Chaos Bellends, and this is the point where the game goes from being fairly tedious to completely insufferable. Space Marines could be a bit of a bitch to fight, but you always knew where they were and where they were coming from, and they wouldn't just appear out of nowhere. Chaos Marines. Oh wait, hold on, let me explain the Chaos Marines. Okay. Chaos Marines are basically former Space Marines who have been corrupted by Chaos, which is like this sentient energy thing that comes from the warp, which is like an alternate dimension that is a mirror of our current one, but it's pretty messed up because everyone in the 40k universe is kind of a dickhead. It's also how the humans manage to make faster than light travel and Jesus Christ. Look, they're Space Marines, but they're even bigger dickheads and they wear spikes. Just roll with it. Chaos Marines have this bad habit of appearing right behind you when you enter an area, and your only real signal to where they are is this red flash on screen that often obscures things. And more than once I thought I was just taking damage, and all likelihood is that before you even find out where they are, they'll have chopped you to bits. This is piss irritating, and will cause many deaths on your first playthrough. Also from here on out, checkpoints only get farther and farther away, meaning you'll have to go through the same encounters over and over and over again, just to get where you need to be. There's no quick save, by the way, because obviously there's no quick save. The forces of chaos or whatever can also spawn these weird portal things and doorways, which will often only appear after you've walked into them, and they are an insta-kill. I am not kidding. This will kill you more than anything else in the late game, and this is also where the bullet spread becomes completely unbearable. You're mostly stuck using the heavy bolter here because it's the only weapon that can reliably destroy Chaos Marines with any kind of efficiency. But you'll be at the mercy of the bullet spread. Sometimes you'll fire 3 bolts and they'll die. Sometimes you'll go through a magazine without hitting a single shot. And God forbid you have to do it at a distance. I actually find it's often better to just run towards your opponent and then fire at close range, but not too close range, rather than picking them off at a distance. Because I don't know what weapons the enemies are using, but it certainly isn't the inaccurate pea shooters the player was given. Oh, did I mention the Fire Warrior has some platforming sections? Yeah, that goes about as well as can be expected. Still no quick save, by the way. You'll fight a bunch of bosses, or at least I think they're meant to be bosses, throughout the campaign. None of them are really anything special, and they all have the same strategy to beat them. Hide behind a pillar while they fire out, and blow them up, assuming your shots hit anyway. These units reappear in later levels as sort of high level standard enemies, and it's dull. None of these bosses even feel like real bosses or give much of a sense of achievement either. So you kill a Dreadnought. Well, that happened. Then you kill a Chaos Demon. Well, that happened. The only sort of memorable boss fight is the penultimate level where Brian Blessed gets infected with chaos and turns into this thing. And, you know, fair enough, I stopped questioning things after the Chaos Demon, and then you kill him. Well, that happened. And then it's time for the final boss, where Severus just straight up gives Kobosh and decides he wants to become one with chaos and become immortal or something. He turns into an emo chicken, you shoot him with your sniper rifle a bunch of times, and then he explodes. The Space Marine captain then calls you and your pals an Uber, and then you leave. That's Fire Warrior. Yeah, it's not exactly Metal Gear Solid 3, but I never expected it to be. Apart from the voice acting on 2 or 3 characters, there really isn't anything all that memorable in Fire Warrior. The plot twist involving chaos can be seen from space, and in 40k, the Imperial guy turning to chaos is pretty much the default storyline. It's obvious that the story here was pretty much an afterthought. Once you beat the game, you'll be given a thank you and sent back to the title screen, where that stupid sexy extra tab starts to give you the eyes. It's just a cutscene viewer and some concept art. I guess it's nice if you're into that sort of thing, but it's not really something I'd beat the game for personally. There's also a higher difficulty setting if you're a dyed-in-the-wool masochist, and some cheat codes if you really want to get the perfect rank on every mission. The game never tells you how to complete these hidden objectives, and I honestly did most of them by accident. There's also a multiplayer mode which, well, yeah, it's obviously dead and it was never anything to write home about, even in 2003. Also, considering the fact that you needed the PS2 internet adapter, which really only Final Fantasy XI and SOCOM players had. Well, I have one, but it came with the PS2. I can't imagine this mode was ever setting anyone's world on fire. And even if you did have this game and the adapter, you were probably going to play something else. Because remember, the PS2 wasn't entirely bereft of first-person shooters. Sure, we didn't have Halo, but we had a good chunk of multi-platform games. Timesplitters, Nightfire, Half-Life, about a billion World War II games. Fire Warrior just never had a standout identity outside of being the only 40k game on consoles. If you wanted a good single-player campaign, you'd play Half-Life. If you wanted good multiplayer, go for Nightfire or Timesplitters 2. All that aside, do I recommend Fire Warrior? No, you can skip this one. It's a shame because there's so much potential here that never even gets close to being realised. Fire Warrior didn't kill Halo, and nobody was going to leave their Halo 2 or Counter-Strike clans to play this online. This seems like a fairly obvious case of a magazine jumping on any exclusive they could find, and that seems consistent with what the other magazines said. Multi-platform magazines and review sites pretty much skewered this game, and the PC version especially got pretty much slated. Fire Warrior was released, beaten up by critics and fans of the games alike, and was quickly forgotten about shortly thereafter. Fire Warrior's cultural footprint is pretty negligible at this point. The GOG release is pretty much the only way to play it. As far as I'm aware, there was never even a plan for a sequel at the time. It seems fairly obvious that this was an attempt to cash in on the newly released Tau faction, who are still going strong to this day, although they still carry some of the stigma with them. The main character Case is speculated to be the Tau commander in Dawn of War Dark Crusade, which is interesting. Looking into this though, it seems like I'm giving conflicting answers, so I'll just stay out of it and let the nerds fight that one out. You should play Dark Crusade, by the way. If you want to play as the Tau in the video game, this is how you do it. Oh, and they also made a book based on Fire Warrior, which I have, obviously. I haven't gotten around to reading it yet though. Apparently it's okay and goes into more depth on the Tau and their culture, but I can't imagine it's very good. I'm adding it to the list of video game novelizations to read if I'm ever in too good a mood and need something to bring me down a bit. So yeah, that's Fire Warrior. Don't play it. There are plenty of other Warhammer games these days, too many to be honest, but they're not all soulless mobile ports. I highly recommend the aforementioned Dawn of War, and Mechanicus is great if you're a big fan of XCOM and toasters. Maybe we'll see another Warhammer 40k FPS in the future, and I'd like to see them have another go at it. Until then though, I wouldn't waste any time on Fire Warrior. Hey, thanks for watching. This was a fun one to make. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to like, comment and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at BantsFerdinand and on twitch.tv at BantsFerdinand. I've been Heather, and I'll catch you guys later.